Some monsters don't lurk under beds. They sit at your dinner table, say grace, and call themselves family. My name is Eleanor Rose Thompson Nellie to most now 78 years old, living in the same rural Georgia where I was born. To the folks at the Saturday farmers market, I'm just Grandma Ellie, the white-haired woman with a knack for peach pies and a steady presence at the 6 o'clock church service. Few would guess the weight I've carried for over half a century, a secret so heavy it could crush the strongest soul. Today, I'm breaking that silence. Not for myself, I've learned to bear this burden, but for anyone trapped in their own quiet prison, especially children whose trust was stolen by those meant to protect them. If my story moves you, I'd be grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment to share where you're watching from. I'd love to connect. This is the hardest tale I'll ever tell, but it's time to let it breathe. I was born in 1947 in a small Georgia town where summer heat presses like a quilt, and family secrets are guarded tighter than land deeds. Our home was a modest wooden house, painted light blue, with a porch where Mama's red geraniums bloomed. We were poor but content, living off Daddy's work in the cotton fields and Mama's baking, which she sold to neighbors. I was the eldest of three: Paul, 2 years younger, and little Rosie, barely 5 when it all began. Life was simple. The smell of fresh bread, bedtime stories, splashing in the creek on sweltering days. I was 10 when tragedy knocked, shattering that fragile happiness. It was May 12, 1957, a gray day with relentless rain. I woke to Mama's cough, deep and ragged, coming from her room. When I peeked in, her face was flushed with fever, her lips tinged an unnatural blue. "Just a bad flu, my flower," she said, trying to smile. But her breathing grew labored, and by morning, Daddy decided to take her to the hospital in Fairview, the nearest town with a doctor. "Ellie, you're in charge of the little ones," he said, his face tight with worry. My grandfather, August Thompson, had been living with us since Grandma passed 8 months prior. A tall man of 68, with a gray mustache and cold, calculating eyes. He was respected in our community for his years as a farm foreman. "I'll keep an eye on the kids," he told Daddy, his hand on his shoulder. I trusted him then. We all did. Daddy carried Mama, wrapped in blankets, to the truck. Her pale face and weak whisper, "Take care of your siblings, Ellie," are burned into my memory. The rain pounded as they drove off, and I turned to the day's tasks, keeping Paul and Rosie fed and distracted with games. Grandfather stayed on the porch, smoking his pipe, his silence heavy as the storm. By evening, my worry grew. Where were they? Had the roads turned to mud? Round 9 p.m., I heard wheels in the yard. I ran to the window, heart pounding, but it was just Daddy, alone, soaked and broken. His red, swollen eyes told me before his words did. "Your mother didn't make it, daughter," he said, voice cracking. "Pneumonia, too advanced." The world tilted. Mama, gone in a day. I clung to him, his wet clothes soaking mine. As grief swallowed us both, Grandfather watched from the kitchen door, his face unreadable. "The wake's being arranged," Daddy said, pulling away. "Be strong, Ellie, for the little ones." That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring into nothing, the rain mirroring my tears. Grandfather poured whiskey and pushed a glass toward me. "Take a sip," he said. "Numbs the pain." I was 10, had never touched alcohol, but the ache in my chest was unbearable. I sipped, the burn matching my raw heart. He refilled the glass, and I drank again, the world blurring. "Life's hard, Eleanor," he said. "Best learn that early." I don't know how much I drank, only that he led me not to my room but to his. In my grief and haze, I didn't question it. What followed broke me in ways I couldn't yet name: rough hands, sharp pain, whispered words. "Now you're the woman of the house." I woke in my own bed, marks on my arms, blood on the sheet, and a truth I couldn't speak. That day, I lost Mama and my innocence. I learned monsters can wear familiar faces, and silence became my cage. I cooked breakfast, tended to Paul and Rosie, and faced Mama's wake with a numbness that shielded me. Who would believe a child over a respected man? How could I hurt Daddy more when he lost his wife? So I stayed quiet, burying the truth deep, where it festered for decades. But this isn't just a story of pain, it's about finding light in the darkest places, about resilience and faith that carried me through. I share it now so others might find courage to speak, to act, to heal. The road was long, but it led me here, whole and unafraid. The blue house on Cottonwood Lane was our world, small but alive with love before the shadows crept in. At 10, I knew every creak of its pine floors, every chip in the whitewashed porch, rail where Mama's geraniums spilled red against the faded paint. We lived in rural Georgia, 1957, where life moved slow, tied to the rhythm of the fields and the church bell on Sundays. Daddy, Ernest, was up before dawn, his hands rough from picking cotton, his smile soft when he'd toss me onto his shoulders after a long day. Mama, Caroline, was the heart of us. Her laughter filled the kitchen as she kneaded dough, her voice a gentle hum during bedtime stories. Paul, 8, was my shadow, always trailing me with questions, while Rosie, 5, clung to Mama's skirts, her giggles like bells. We were poor, our clothes patched, our meals simple beans, cornbread, sometimes peach cobbler when the harvest was good. But we were happy, or so I thought, until the world turned gray. Mama's baking kept us afloat. Neighbors would stop by for her sourdough or pecan pies, leaving coins that helped buy shoes or fabric. She let me stir the batter, her hand guiding mine, teaching me the measure of flour and love. "You're my helper, Ellie," she'd say, tucking a stray curl behind my ear. The kitchen smelled of yeast and warmth, a sanctuary where I felt safe. Outside, the creek behind our house was our playground. Paul and I would wade in its cool water, chasing minnows, while Rosie splashed at the edge, squealing. Summers were long, heavy with heat, but those moments felt eternal, like nothing could break us. Grandfather August came to us after Grandma's death in 1956. He was a towering man, his broad shoulders unbent by age, his gray mustache neatly trimmed. His eyes, though, were sharp, always watching, weighing. He'd been a foreman, respected for his firm hand and quick mind, and folks spoke of him with a nod. At first, I was glad he was there. His presence meant Daddy could focus on work, and I liked hearing his stories of the old days, even if his voice carried an edge. He'd sit on the porch, pipe smoke curling into the dusk, and I'd think he was just a lonely man missing his wife. I didn't see the danger then, didn't know the mask he wore. Our days had a rhythm. Daddy left at sunrise, Mama tended the house, and I helped with chores before school. Paul and I walked the 2 miles to the rural schoolhouse, a one-room building, where Miss Clara taught us reading and sums. Rosie stayed home, too young for lessons, playing with rag dolls Mama sewed. Evenings were for family. Daddy reading from the Bible, Mama mending clothes. US kids sprawled on the rug, listening to the crickets outside. Church was the anchor of our week, the whole town gathering in pews worn smooth by years of prayer. I loved the hymns, the way Mama's voice soared, blending with the choir. It felt like God was close, watching over us. But there were cracks, small ones I didn't notice at 10. Daddy's long hours left him tired, his eyes sometimes distant. Mama worried about money, her brow furrowing when she thought I wasn't looking. Grandfather's rival changed things. His rules were stricter than Mama's, his temper quicker. "Children should be seen, not heard," he'd say, and I'd shrink under his gaze. Still, I trusted him, trusted the world to be kind. That trust was my undoing. On May 11, 1957, the air felt heavy, the sky bruised with clouds. I helped Mama bake that morning, rolling dough for biscuits, unaware it would be our last time. She seemed tired, coughing now and then, but brushed it off. "Just a tickle," she said, smiling. I believed her because I wanted to. That night, I slept soundly, Rosie's small body curled against mine, the patter of rain on the tin roof lulling me. I didn't know it was the last night of my childhood, the last night I'd feel whole. When I woke to Mama's cough on May 12th, it was different, deep, tearing, like something breaking inside her. I ran to her room, heart pounding, and found her in bed, fever-bright eyes meeting mine. "Mom, you okay?" I asked, voice small. She nodded, but her lips were wrong, blue at the edges. "Daddy, home because of the rain," took one look and decided. "I'm taking her to Fairview," he said, wrapping her in blankets. "Grandfather promised to watch us, And I nodded, clinging to the hope that Mama would be back by supper. As Daddy carried her out, her whispered words, "Take care of your siblings." Ellie felt like a weight I didn't understand. The truck disappeared into the storm, and I turned to face a day that would change everything. The rain didn't stop on May 12, 1957, and neither did the unraveling of my world. After Daddy left with Mama, I stood at the window, watching the truck's taillights fade into the gray, my heart a knot of worry. At 10, I was used to helping Mama with chores, but being in charge of Paul and Rosie felt heavier than any basket of laundry. Paul, sensing the tension, pestered me with questions. "When's Mama coming back? Is she real sick?" I shushed him, forcing a smile. "She'll be fine, just needs a doctor." Rosie, oblivious, tugged at my skirt, begging for a story. I gathered them in the kitchen, trying to keep things normal. But the house felt hollow. Without Mama's hum, Grandfather stayed on the porch most of the day, his pipe smoke drifting through the damp air. He'd check on us now and then, his boots heavy on the floorboards, his voice gruff. "Y'all behaving?" He'd ask, and I'd nod, avoiding his eyes. I made lunch: cold cornbread and beans. Nothing like Mama's warm meals. Paul complained, but I snapped at him to eat, my patience thin. To distract them, I invented a game, pretending the living room was a castle, with Rosie as the princess and Paul the knight. Their laughter eased my fear for a moment, but it couldn't drown out the rain or the questions in my head. Why wasn't Daddy back? Was Mama okay? As dusk fell, the waiting grew unbearable. I put Rosie to bed early, reading her one of Mama's stories about a girl who tamed a wild horse. Her eyes fluttered shut, but Paul lingered, his face pale. "Something's wrong, ain't it, Ellie?" he asked. I hugged him, lying. "Daddy's just slow cause of the mud." He didn't believe me, but he crawled into bed. I sat by the window, the rain a steady drum, my stomach twisting. Grandfather was still on the porch, a shadow against the storm, and I wondered why he seemed so calm when I was falling apart. Round 9 p.m., the crunch of tires in the mud jolted me upright. I ran to the window, hope flaring maybe Mama was better. Maybe they were all coming home. But it was just Daddy, alone, his head dripping as he climbed out of the truck. When he stepped inside, his face told me everything. His eyes, red and hollow, carried a grief I'd never seen. He took off his hat, clutching it like a lifeline, and I asked, "Where's Mama?" Though I already knew. "She didn't make it, Ellie," he said, his voice breaking. "Pneumonia took her too fast." The words hit like a fist, stealing my breath. "Mama, gone?" Just that morning, she'd tried to smile, promised she'd be fine. How could she be gone forever? Daddy pulled me into a hug, his wet coat soaking my dress, and we stood there, clinging to each other as the world crumbled. I wanted to scream, to beg God to give her back, but no sound came. Grandfather watched from the kitchen door, his face a mask, saying nothing. "The wake's set for tomorrow," Daddy said, pulling back, his hands heavy on my shoulders. "You gotta be strong for Paul and Rosie." I nodded, swallowing tears, though I didn't know how to be strong when I felt so small. That night, after Daddy went to bed, his muffled sobs leaking through the walls, I sat at the kitchen table, the rain relentless outside. Grandfather sat across from me, pouring whiskey into a glass. "Take a sip," he said, sliding it over. "It'll help." I hesitated. Mama never let us near liquor, but the pain in my chest was a living thing, clawing at me. I took a sip, wincing as it burned, then another when he refilled it. The room spun, my thoughts muddy. "Life's cruel, Eleanor," he said, his voice low. "You'll learn." When he stood, saying he'd help me to bed, I followed, too dazed to argue, but he didn't take me to my room. In his, the nightmare began, hands where they shouldn't be, pain I couldn't escape, his breath hot with whiskey and lies. "You're the woman of the house now," he whispered. I don't remember how I got back to my bed, only waking to dawn, my body aching, marks on my arms, and a stain I hid before Rosie stirred. The wake was a blur of neighbors' faces, their hugs cold against my numbness. Mama lay in a plain wooden coffin, her face too still, like a stranger's. Paul sobbed. Rosie kept asking when Mama would wake up, and I held their hands, my own grief locked away. I cooked, cleaned, smiled when spoken to, all while the truth festered inside me. Grandfather acted the grieving father-in-law, his eyes daring me to speak. I didn't. Who would believe a child over him? Daddy was already broken. I couldn't shatter him more. So I buried it, vowing to protect Paul and Rosie, to keep our family from crumbling further. But the silence was a cage, and I was its prisoner, carrying a wound no one could see. Asterisk section for the days after Mama's wake blurred into a haze of grief and survival. But the real nightmare was just beginning. At 10, I was no stranger to responsibility, helping Mama with laundry, minding Paul and Rosie, but now I was the woman of the house in ways I couldn't have imagined. Grandfather's words that night in his room echoed in my skull, a poison that seeped into every moment. His hands, his breath, the weight of him, they haunted me, turning our blue house into a place of shadows. I woke each morning with a dread that clung like damp Georgia clay, knowing he was there, watching, waiting, yet I had to keep going. For Paul, for Rosie, for Daddy, who was drowning in his own sorrow. Daddy left before dawn for the fields, his shoulders slumped, his eyes distant. He'd kiss my forehead, murmuring, "You're a good girl, Ellie," before disappearing into the dark. I'd start breakfast, grits and eggs, nothing fancy, my hands shaking as I cracked shells. Paul and Rosie depended on me to fill the void Mama left, and I tried. God knows I did. I braided Rosie's hair, packed Paul's lunch, walked them to school, all while Grandfather's eyes followed me, cold and calculating. He was careful at first, only acting when Daddy was gone and the kids were out of sight. "Help me in the shed, Eleanor," he'd say, his voice a command, not a request. I'd go, heart pounding, knowing what awaited. The shed smelled of oil and rust, a dim place where tools hung like threats. He'd close the door, and I'd freeze, my mind scrambling for escape but finding none. The pain was sharp, the shame heavier than anything I'd ever carried. "This stays between us," he'd say afterward, wiping his hands like he'd finished a chore. "Your daddy's got enough to bear." He used my love for Daddy as a chain, binding me to silence. I was 10, too young to understand manipulation, too scared to defy a man everyone respected. In our town, August Thompson was a pillar churchgoer, former foreman, widower. A child's word against his was nothing. I learned to live in fragments. By day, I was Ellie, the responsible sister, stirring beans, mending socks, telling Rosie bedtime stories. At school, I was quiet, my grades slipping as my mind wandered to dark places. Miss Clara, our teacher, noticed. "You're not yourself, Eleanor," she said once, but I shrugged it off. How could I explain? At night, when Grandfather found his moments when Daddy was at a neighbor's or Paul and Rosie were asleep, the other Ellie emerged. The one who endured, who shut her eyes and prayed for it to end. I'd lie awake afterward, staring at the ceiling, wondering if God saw me, if Mama did. The community rallied around us at first. Women brought casseroles, men helped Daddy in the fields. But grief fades for others faster than for those living it, and soon we were alone again. Daddy barely noticed the change in me, his own pain blinding him. He'd come home exhausted, eat in silence, then sit on the porch, staring at the stars where he used to look for Mama's smile. I wanted to tell him, to scream the truth, but fear stopped me. What if he didn't believe me? What if it broke him? What if Grandfather turned it against me, saying I'd lied, that I'd tempted him? The thought made me sick. I started seeing Grandfather for what he was, a monster wearing a familiar face. His kindness, once comforting, now felt like a trap. When he'd offer me a peppermint or pat my head in front of others, I'd flinch, my skin crawling. Paul noticed, asking, "Why are you so jumpy, Ellie?" I'd snap, "Mind your own," hating myself for it. Rosie was too young to see, thank God, but I watched her closely, keeping her near me when Grandfather was around. I'd lock our bedroom door at night, a habit that felt like defiance, though it wouldn't stop him if he wanted in. The silence grew heavier each day, a stone in my chest I couldn't shift. I stopped singing hymns at church, the words sticking in my throat. How could I praise a God who let this happen? Yet I clung to routine, cooking, cleaning, caring for my siblings because it was all I had. The creek, once my refuge, felt tainted. I couldn't go there without remembering the times he'd followed me, pretending to check the fishing lines. Even Mama's geraniums, wilting without her care, seemed to mock my failure to keep things whole. By late summer, I was a ghost of myself, thinner, quieter, my eyes hollow. Neighbors commented, "Poor Ellie, missing her mama," and I let them think that was all. But the truth was a wound festering inside me, one I didn't know how to heal. I prayed sometimes, whispering in the dark, begging Mama's spirit to guide me, to make it stop. I didn't know then that courage was growing in me, small but stubborn, like a weed pushing through cracked earth. It would take time, but that spark would eventually light the way out of my prison. The months after Mama's death stretched into a relentless winter of silence, not just from the cold that frosted our fields but from the secret I carried like a bruise no one could see. At 10, I was trapped in a double life. The Ellie who scrubbed pots, braided Rosie's hair, and walked Paul to school. And the Ellie who dreaded the creak of grandfather's boots, knowing what came next. The blue house, once a haven, was now a maze of fear, every corner hiding a threat. I kept going for my siblings, for Daddy, but each day chipped away at me, leaving a hollow space where my childhood used to be. Daddy was a ghost in his own home, consumed by grief and work. He'd leave at dawn, his lunch pail swinging, and return after dark, too tired to notice the way I flinched when grandfather passed too close. "You're doing good, Ellie," he'd say, ruffling my hair, and I'd force a smile, the lie burning my throat. Paul and Rosie leaned on me, their needs a tether to sanity. I'd make supper lumpy cornbread, thin stew trying to mimic Mama's recipes, but nothing tasted right. Rosie would chatter about her dolls, Paul would grumble about school, and I'd nod, half listening, my eyes darting to grandfather's chair at the table, where he'd sit, watching me with that cold, knowing gaze. The abuse didn't happen every day, but the threat was constant. Grandfather was methodical, waiting for Daddy to be gone, for Paul and Rosie to be at school or playing at a neighbor's. He'd call me to the shed, the attic, or his room, always with a task as an excuse. "Fix this hinge, Eleanor," or "Help me sort these papers." I'd go, legs trembling, because defiance felt impossible. His words were always the same: "Don't tell, or you'll hurt your daddy worse." I believed him, terrified of breaking our family further. The shame was a weight I couldn't shake, making me feel dirty, complicit. Even though I was just a child, school was no escape. I'd sit at my desk, staring at the chalkboard, Miss Clara's voice a distant hum. My grade slipped, and she'd keep me after class. Her brow creased. "What's wrong, Eleanor? You're not trying." I'd mumble about missing Mama, and she'd pat my shoulder, unaware of the deeper wound. I envied the other kids, their laughter untainted, their worries small. I'd watch them play at recess, but I stayed by the fence, too afraid to join, too afraid to be seen. My body was changing, small signs of puberty that made me want to disappear. I wore Daddy's old shirts, loose and shapeless, hoping to hide. But grandfather noticed, his comments like knives. "Turning into a woman, ain't you?" Nights were the worst. I'd lie beside Rosie, her soft breaths a reminder of what I had to protect. I started sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow, a secret that gave me a flicker of control, though I knew I'd never use it. When nightmares came, flashes of his hands, his voice, I'd bite my lip to stay quiet, not wanting to wake Rosie. I stopped praying, convinced God had turned away. Yet I clung to Mama's memory, whispering to her in the dark, begging for strength. Her geraniums were dead now, the pots cracked, and I felt like I'd failed her. Failed us all. The community had moved on. The casseroles stopped. The men no longer helped in the fields. Neighbors saw us as the sad family who lost Caroline. Nothing more. At church, I mouthed the hymns, my heart empty. Grandfather played the grieving father-in-law perfectly, his hand on my shoulder during services, a silent warning. I wanted to scream, to tell the preacher, but fear choked me. What if they called me a liar? What if Daddy lost everything because of me? So I stayed silent, the secret a stone in my gut, growing heavier each day. But something was shifting inside me, a spark of defiance I didn't recognize yet. I started noticing things: grandfather's moods, The way he'd drink more on certain nights. The times he was distracted. I'd linger with Paul and Rosie longer, keeping them close when Daddy was away. I'd fake a cough or a stomachache to avoid being alone with him, though it rarely worked. Once, when he called me to the shed, I dropped a hammer by accident, making enough noise to bring Paul running. Grandfather backed off, muttering, and I felt a tiny victory, a crack in his control. By early 1958, I was 11, and the weight was crushing me. I was thinner, my eyes shadowed, my laughter gone. Neighbors whispered, "Poor Ellie, still grieving." But they didn't see the truth. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, my trust in the world shattered. Yet that spark grew, fed by love for my siblings, by memories of Mama's courage. I didn't know it then, but I was learning to survive, to wait for a chance to break free. The silence was my prison, but it wouldn't hold me forever. Section 6. By the spring of 1958, I was 11. And the blue house had become a battlefield where I fought to keep my siblings safe and my spirit intact. The abuse from grandfather continued, a shadow that darkened every day. But something inside me was hardening, like a seedling pushing through rocky soil. I wasn't the same frightened 10-year-old who'd frozen under his hands. I was learning to watch, to wait, to resist in ways he couldn't predict. My love for Paul and Rosie, and the faint hope that Daddy might see, kept me from breaking. Small acts of defiance became my weapons, each one a step toward reclaiming myself. I started paying attention to grandfather's patterns. He was boldest when Daddy was in town or working late, when Paul and Rosie were at school or with neighbors. I'd make excuses to stay near others, volunteering to help Mrs. Carter next door with her canning or lingering at school with Miss Clara. "I need extra math practice," I'd lie, and she'd let me stay, unaware she was my shield. At home, I kept Paul and Rosie close, inventing chores that kept us together, shelling peas, mending clothes, anything to avoid being alone. Grandfather noticed, his eyes narrowing, but he couldn't act with witnesses around. I found hiding spots, too. The barn's loft, tucked behind old hay bales, became my sanctuary. I'd slip up there when grandfather's voice took on that low, dangerous tone, my heart pounding as I waited for him to lose interest. Once, I stayed so long I fell asleep, waking to Daddy's worried call at dusk. "Just exploring," I mumbled, and he believed me, too tired to question. I also started locking our bedroom door at night, wedging a chair under the knob for extra security. Rosie thought it was a game, giggling as I secured it, but Paul's eyes lingered, like he sensed something I couldn't say. My body was betraying me, small curves appearing that made grandfather's gaze hungrier. I'd hunch my shoulders, wear loose dresses, even bind my chest with an old scarf. Anything to stay invisible. "You're growing up fast," he said once, his voice thick, and I wanted to scream. Instead, I spilled hot coffee on his lap by mistake at breakfast, earning a sharp glare, but no punishment. Daddy was there, sipping his own cup, oblivious. These moments of rebellion, tiny as they were, felt like victories, proof I wasn't powerless. Daddy was starting to notice things, though, and that changed everything. He'd come home earlier some days, his brow furrowed as he watched me. "You okay, Ellie?" he'd ask, and I'd nod, afraid to speak. He'd linger in the kitchen, asking about school, his eyes searching mine. Once, he caught me wincing when grandfather brushed past, and his jaw tightened. "He bother you?" he asked, voice low. I shook my head, heart racing, terrified of what the truth might unleash. But his questions planted a seed of hope. Maybe he'd see. Maybe he'd save me. Aunt Louise, Daddy's cousin from Fairview, started visiting more often. Her sharp eyes missing nothing. She'd bring cookies, sit with us on Sundays, and watch me like she could read my soul. "You're too quiet, Eleanor," she said once, handing me a peppermint. "Something eating at you." I shrugged, my throat tight, but her kindness was a lifeline. Grandfather was different around her, polite, distant, like he knew she was dangerous. I wanted to tell her, to spill everything, but fear held me back. What if she didn't believe me? What if it tore our family apart? By March, the tension in the house was thick, like the air before a storm. I was cleaning the stove one Saturday, Daddy in town, Paul and Rosie at a neighbor's party. Grandfather appeared at the kitchen door, his voice ablaze. "Come here, Eleanor." My stomach dropped, but something snapped inside me. "I'm busy," I said, scrubbing harder. Not looking at him, he grabbed my arm, his grip bruising, and started pulling me toward his room. "Who do you think you are?" he growled. I fought, kicking, scratching, not caring that he was stronger. I wasn't going quietly this time. Then, the sound of tires in the yard stopped him cold. Daddy's truck. Back early. Grandfather shoved me against the stove and vanished to his room. I smoothed my apron, my hands shaking, as Daddy walked in, a bag of flour in his arms. He glanced at my red face, my trembling hands. "What's wrong, Ellie?" he asked, setting the bag down. "Nothing," I lied, but his eyes lingered, suspicious. "He'd come back because of a coming storm," he said, but I wondered if he sensed something worse brewing in our house. That moment was a turning point. Daddy's attention, Aunt Louise's visits, my own small rebellions, they were cracks in Grandfather's control. I didn't know how or when, but I felt a shift, like the world was tilting back toward light. The cage of silence was still there, but its bars were weakening, and I was ready to push harder, to fight for the girl I used to be. The storm that broke in March 1958 wasn't just the one churning the Georgia sky. It was the one that had been building in our house for nearly a year. I was 11, and the weight of Grandfather's abuse had carved me hollow. But my small acts of defiance, hiding, delaying, resisting, had sharpened my will. Daddy's growing suspicion, his unexpected returns, and Aunt Louise's watchful visits were fraying Grandfather's control. That night, when the truth finally erupted, it came with a violence that both shattered and saved us, leaving me caught between relief and a new kind of fear. It was a cold April evening, the air heavy with the promise of rain. Paul and Rosie were asleep, their soft breaths a quiet anchor in the chaos of my mind. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes by the flicker of a kerosene lamp, the wood stove casting an orange glow. The house was still, save for the crickets outside and the occasional pop of embers. Daddy had gone to check a noise in the tool shed, or so he said. Later, I'd wonder if he'd planned it, setting a trap to catch what he'd begun to suspect. Grandfather's heavy steps broke the silence, his shadow filling the doorway. "Alone, Eleanor," he said, his voice low, laced with that familiar menace. I nodded, not turning, my hands scrubbing a plate with desperate focus. "It's been a while since we had a moment," he continued, stepping closer. I felt his breath on my neck, sour with whiskey and tobacco, and my stomach twisted. His hands gripped my shoulders, and I froze, the plate slipping in my soapy hands. I knew what came next, the nightmare I'd endured too many times. But something in me, maybe exhaustion, maybe rage, refused to bend. "Stop," I whispered, barely audible. But he laughed, a sound that chilled me. Then, a voice like thunder cut through. "What's happening here?" Daddy stood in the doorway, his face a storm of disbelief and fury. Grandfather's hands dropped, and he stepped back, his mask slipping. "Nothing, Ernest," he said, voice smooth. "Just talking." Daddy's eyes burned, fixed on him. "Talking?" That's not what I saw. The air crackled, the lamp's light flickering as if it felt the tension. I stood frozen, the plate dripping in my hands, unable to speak. Daddy's gaze shifted to me, softening for a moment. "Go to your room, Ellie," he said, his voice tight but firm. I hesitated, torn between fleeing and fearing what would happen next. "Go," he repeated, and I dropped the plate, running to the hallway but stopping in the shadows, my heart pounding. "What were you doing with my daughter?" Daddy's voice was low, dangerous, as I peered from the dark. Grandfather tried to laugh it off. "You're imagining things, son. We were just—" "Don't lie." Daddy cut him off, stepping closer. "I've seen it for weeks, the marks on her arms, the way she flinches when you're near, the nightmares. You think I'm blind?" Grandfather's tone shifted, defensive. "She's clumsy, always hurting herself. And nightmares. She lost her mother. It's normal." Daddy's voice rose, shaking with rage. "Last night, I saw you try to enter her room, even when she said she was sick." "Don't take me for a fool." Silence fell, heavy as the storm outside. Grandfather's voice turned oily, conciliatory. "You don't understand, Ernest. The girls. Confused, needs a mother's touch. She misinterprets. Shut up, Daddy roared. And I heard a crash of glass shattering. Then, the sickening thud of fist on flesh. I covered my ears, but the sounds of their fight grunts, furniture, scraping, more breaking glass reached me. I crept back to the kitchen door, unable to stay away. Daddy was panting, fists bloodied, while Grandfather lay crumpled on the floor, a dark stain spreading under his head where he'd hit the stove's edge. He wasn't moving. Dad, I whispered, trembling. He turned, his face a mask of shock, as if waking from a nightmare. Ellie, I told you to go, he said, voice breaking. He knelt by Grandfather, checking his pulse, then nodded, his jaw tight. Wake Paul, he ordered, suddenly calm. Tell him you didn't hear anything. You were sleeping. Understand? No matter what. You saw nothing. I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. And Ellie, he added, gripping my shoulders, one day, I'll ask what happened in this house, and you'll tell me everything. But not today. Promise. I promise, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos. I woke Paul, whispering the lie, then hugged Rosie, who slept through it all. The night filled with voices, neighbors, the sheriff, the doctor. Lanterns flashed, and I heard the sheriff's low voice. An accident, Ernest. He slipped, hit his head. Could happen to anyone, especially after whiskey. Whether he believed it or not, the story stuck. Grandfather was gone, and with him, the terror that had caged me. But as I lay in bed, listening to the rain, I knew the nightmare wasn't over, just changed. The silence I'd kept was now a pact with Daddy, and I wondered if I'd ever be free. The morning after Grandfather's death, the blue house felt different, like it was holding its breath. I was 11, standing in the kitchen where blood had stained the floor just hours before, now scrubbed clean by Daddy's hands. The sheriff's words, an accident, could happen to anyone, echoed in my mind. A story the town accepted without question. August Thompson, 69, had slipped in a drunken stupor, hit his head on the stove, and died. No one looked deeper. Not in a small Georgia town where grief was private and families closed ranks. I was relieved, but the weight of our secret Daddy's fight, my silence settled like a new chain, binding us in a fragile pact. The wake was quiet, sparsely attended. A few old farm hands came, their hats in hand, murmuring condolences. No one cried, not even Daddy, who stood by the coffin with a face carved from stone. Paul and Rosie clung to me, confused but sensing the shift. I held their hands, my own steady, despite the storm inside. As the plain pine box was lowered into the earth, I felt a lightness, as if the terror that had stalked me was buried with him. But I also felt fear. What now? Would the truth ever surface? Would I ever speak it? Daddy didn't talk about that night, and I followed his lead. You saw nothing, he'd said, and I kept that promise, though it cost me. I'd catch him watching me sometimes, his eyes heavy with unspoken questions, but he never asked. Instead, he threw himself into keeping us together. He started coming home earlier, helping with supper, even trying to braid Rosie's hair, his big hands fumbling but determined. Your mama'd want you to have proper braids, he'd mutter, and I'd smile, though it hurt to see him try to fill her place. Paul noticed the change, asking, Is Daddy okay? I'd nod, hiding my own doubts. The community moved on quickly. Neighbors stopped whispering about the accident, and life resumed its rhythm. I went back to school, my grades creeping up as fear loosened its grip. Miss Clara commented, You're brighter these days, Eleanor, and I let her think it was just time healing me. At home, I cooked, cleaned, cared for Paul and Rosie, but the tasks felt lighter without Grandfather's shadow. I could walk to the creek again, though I avoided the shed, its door a reminder of what I'd endured. Mama's geranium pots sat empty, but I planted marigolds in one, a small act of reclaiming the porch. Aunt Louise's visits became a lifeline. She'd drive from Fairview every Sunday, bringing pound cake and sharp eyes that seemed to see through me. You're looking stronger, she said once, squeezing my hand. I wanted to tell her everything, to unburden myself, but the words wouldn't come. She never pushed, just stayed close, Her presence a quiet promise that someone cared. Daddy leaned on her, too, talking late into the night about the fields, the kids, anything but the truth we shared. I'd listen from the hallway, wondering if he'd ever tell her what happened. Sleep was easier, though nightmares still came. Flashes of grandfather's hands, his voice, the thud of his fall. I'd wake, heart racing, but Rosie's soft breathing beside me grounded me. I stopped hiding the knife under my pillow, a sign I was starting to trust the world again. Church felt different, too. I sang hymns softly, testing my voice, feeling God might be listening after all. Daddy noticed, smiling, during a service, and I felt a spark of hope. We were healing, slowly, together. But the silence wasn't gone. It lived in the spaces between us, in the questions Daddy didn't ask, in the truth I didn't speak. I wondered if keeping quiet was protecting us or poisoning us. At night, I'd sit on the porch, staring at the stars, whispering to Mama, did I do right? No answer came, but the act of asking kept her close. I was learning to carry the weight differently, to let it shape me without breaking me. By summer, the house was ours again. Daddy planted a small garden, teaching Paul to tend it, while Rosie and I picked wildflowers for the table. We laughed more, small bursts that felt like gifts. Yet I knew this peace was fragile, built on a lie we all upheld. The town saw us as the family recovering from loss, not the one hiding a darker truth. I was okay with that. For now, I was alive. My siblings were safe, and Daddy was trying. That was enough to keep going, to believe in a future where I might one day speak. The summer of 1958 brought a cautious warmth to our blue house, like the first green shoots after a long frost. I was 11, no longer caged by grandfather's shadow, but the silence of what happened lingered, a quiet ache between Daddy and me. We were rebuilding, though, stitching our family back together with small, deliberate acts. Daddy became more than a provider. He was a presence, teaching Rosie to tie her shoes, helping Paul with arithmetic, even burning biscuits in an attempt to bake like Mama. His efforts, clumsy but earnest, were a promise we'd survive. For me, the absence of fear was a gift, but I was still learning to trust it, to believe the nightmare was truly over. Daddy's hands, rough from the fields, now tackled domestic tasks with a determination that surprised our neighbors. Ernest, a housewife, they'd tease when he hung laundry or sewed a patch on Paul's overalls. He'd shrug, saying, my kids need it, so I do it. In 1958 rural Georgia, a widower taking on women's work was unheard of. But Daddy didn't care. He'd sit with us at night, reading from Mama's old Bible, his voice steady, grounding us. Those moments felt like a bridge to the life we lost, though I still caught him staring at the porch sometimes, where Mama's geraniums once bloomed, his eyes far away. I threw myself into caring for Paul and Rosie, finding purpose in their needs. I'd wake early to make breakfast oatmeal or eggs, better than before but never like Mama's. I'd walk them to school, Rosie skipping, Paul kicking stones, and I'd feel a flicker of pride that they were okay, that I was keeping them safe. At school, I was quieter but focused, my grades climbing. Miss Clara praised my spelling, saying, you've got a sharp mind, Eleanor. I'd blush, unused to compliments, but her words planted a seed. Maybe I could be more than the girl who survived. The house was ours again, its corners no longer hiding threats. I started cleaning out Mama's things, folding her aprons, keeping her favorite scarf under my pillow. I replanted the geranium pots, their red blooms a nod to her memory. The creek became a refuge again. Paul, Rosie, and I would splash there on hot days, their laughter easing the tightness in my chest. But the shed remained off limits, its door a reminder of what I'd endured. I'd catch myself watching Daddy, wondering if he'd ever ask what he'd promised that night. But he didn't, and I wasn't ready to tell. Aunt Louise's visits were a steady rhythm, her old Ford rattling into our yard every Sunday. She'd bring jam or a wear-upon scarf, her sharp eyes softening when she looked at me. You're growing tall, Eleanor, she'd say. But I felt she saw more the shadows in my eyes, the way I held myself tight. She'd talk with Daddy late into the night, their voices low, and I'd strain to hear, wondering if he'd told her about grandfather. Her presence was a comfort, a hint that someone might understand if I ever spoke. But fear still held my tongue. What if the truth broke us all? Church became a place of healing. I started singing again, softly at first, letting the hymns carry my pain. Daddy noticed, squeezing my hand during a service, and I felt we were mending together. Nightmares still came, but less often, and when I woke, I'd whisper to Mama, feeling her closer now. I was learning to carry the past without letting it crush me. To see myself not as broken but as someone who'd fought and won. By 1959, Daddy was talking about the future. Your mama wanted you to study, Ellie, he'd say when I argued I should stay home to help. You're going back to school proper. I didn't fight him. Though the idea scared me, I'd changed too much to fit with other kids. But his insistence was a spark, a belief I could be more. Paul was growing, too, taller and curious, while Rosie's chatter filled the house with light. We were a family, scarred but standing, and I clung to that. One evening, as we sat on the porch, Daddy pointed to the stars. Your mama's up there, watching, he said. I nodded, feeling a truth in it. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore, it was a space where we understood each other without words. I didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time, I believed it could be. The blue house was home again, and I was starting to feel like Ellie, not just the girl who survived. The summer of 1960 marked a turning point, as our family left the blue house on Cottonwood Lane for a new life in Fairview. I was 13, still carrying the weight of my unspoken truth, but the promise of a fresh start stirred something in me, hope, fragile but real. Aunt Louise, Daddy's cousin, had been our anchor since Mama's death, and her offer to take us in changed everything. Her big house in Fairview, with its creaking floors and wide windows, was a world away from our rural life, and though leaving home was bittersweet, it felt like a chance to outrun the shadows of the past. Aunt Louise had proposed the move over. Sweet tea on our porch the previous fall. Ernest, that house is too big for me alone, she'd said, her voice firm but kind. The kids need better schools, especially Eleanor. She's got a mind that shouldn't be wasted. Daddy hesitated, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. This land's all I've got, Louise, he said, but her practicality won out. Hire someone to tend it. Think of their future. The idea took root, and by July, we packed our lives into a few suitcases, clothes, Mama's porcelain dishes, a box of photos, and drove the 20 miles to Fairview. The blue house fading in the rear view. Fairview was a bustling town of 5,000, with paved streets and a movie theater that dazzled Rosie. Aunt Louise's house was grand by our standards. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, a real bathroom with running water that Paul couldn't stop flushing. Everyone gets their own room, Louise announced, and Rosie squealed, claiming a corner bedroom with yellow curtains. I chose a small room overlooking the backyard. Its quiet simplicity a comfort. Daddy took a job at a general store, trading his hoe for a ledger, his hands now smudged with ink instead of dirt. The change unsettled him at first. He'd come home quiet, lost in thought, but he adapted, driven by his promise to give us more. I enrolled at Our Lady of Grace, a Catholic school run by nuns, a far cry from the one-room schoolhouse back home. The first day, in a starched navy uniform that felt like a costume, I stood among girls who smelled of lavender soap and spoke with easy confidence. They were daughters of shopkeepers, doctors, the mayor, worlds apart from me, the country girl, with patched shoes. I sat at the back, spoke only when called on, and spent recess in the library, hiding in books. The nuns were strict but fair, their rulers snapping desks when we whispered. Sister Agnes, the math teacher, noticed my quick sums. You've a head for numbers, Eleanor, she said, and I clung to her words, a lifeline in a sea of strangeness. Adjusting wasn't easy. The other girls whispered about my accent, my second-hand uniform, and I felt like an outsider, my past a barrier I couldn't explain. At home, I helped Louise with chores, cooking, sewing, scrubbing floors, falling into old rhythms. She was different from Mama, brisk where Mama was warm, but her heart was big. She'd teach me to knit, saying, a girl needs skills, but also smarts. Don't let anyone cheat you. Her blend of old-school wisdom and quiet feminism intrigued me, though I didn't have words for it then. Paul and Rosie thrived. Paul joined a baseball team. Rosie made friends who braided her hair with ribbons. Seeing them happy eased my guilt for leaving the blue house. Daddy was finding his way, too. He'd smile more, joking with Louis over supper, his laughter a sound I'd almost forgotten. He'd take us to the creek in Fairview, not as wild as ours but close enough, and we'd skip stones, pretending we were back home. Yet I caught him staring at me sometimes, his eyes heavy with that unspoken promise. One day, I'll ask. I wasn't ready, but his presence, steady and protective, was enough for now. The nightmares hadn't stopped, though they were softer, more memory than terror. I'd wake, clutching Mama's scarf, and whisper to her, feeling her strengthen me. School became a refuge, the routine of lessons grounding me. I started writing in a notebook Sister Agnes gave me, small stories about the creek, the stars, anything but the truth. It was a way to reclaim my voice, to prove I was more than my scars. Louise noticed, saying, "You've got a gift, Eleanor. Don't hide it." Her belief, like Daddy's, was a spark, lighting a path I couldn't yet see. Fairview was a new beginning, but the past trailed me, a shadow I couldn't shake. Still, I was learning to stand taller, to trust the world a little more. The blue house was gone, but its lessons of love, loss, and survival were part of me, shaping the girl I was becoming. Fairview was reshaping me, slowly, like a river smoothing a stone. At 13, I was finding my place in Aunt Louise's big house, and the unfamiliar world of Our Lady of Grace School. The scars of my past were still raw, but the safety of this new life, Daddy's steady presence, Louise's sharp-eyed care, Paul and Rosie's laughter gave me room to breathe. School became more than a refuge. It was where I discovered a voice I didn't know I had, through words on a page and a conversation with Louise that cracked open the silence I'd carried for years. Our Lady of Grace was daunting, with its polished floors and strict nuns, but I was excelling. Math came easily, history fascinated me, and Sister Cecilia, the English teacher, saw something in my quiet focus. One day, she handed back an essay I'd written about the creek behind our old house, her eyes bright. "Eleanor, this is vivid, alive," she said, tapping the paper. "You have a gift for words. Have you thought about teaching?" I blushed, mumbling that I hadn't, but her words lodged in me. Teaching me. The idea felt too big, but it was a seed, planted in soil I was just beginning to trust. I started writing more, filling the notebooks Sister Cecilia gave me with stories, some about Mama's laughter, others about places I'd never been, free of pain. Writing was a safe place to feel, to remember without breaking. At home, I'd read to Rosie, making up tales of brave girls who slew dragons, and she'd clap, begging for more. Paul, now 12, teased me, but he'd listen, too, leaning against the doorframe. Louise noticed, saying, "Keep writing, Eleanor. It's your way out." I didn't know what she meant, but I kept at it, each word a step toward reclaiming myself. The other girls at school were still a mystery, their chatter about boys and dresses foreign to me. I stayed on the edges, eating lunch alone, my nose in a book. But one girl, Clara, started sitting with me, sharing her apple slices and talking about her dog. Her kindness disarmed me, and slowly, I let her in, laughing at her stories, feeling a flicker of normalcy. Clara never asked about my past, and I was grateful she saw me as Ellie, not the girl with secrets. Aunt Louise was the heart of our new rhythm. She'd teach me practical things, how to balance a budget, stitch a hem, but also pushed me to think bigger. "A woman needs her own mind," she'd say, handing me a newspaper to read. Her mix of old Georgia values and quiet rebellion intrigued me. She treated Daddy like a brother, Paul and Rosie like her own, and me like someone she was determined to save. I felt her watching me, waiting, and it both comforted and unnerved me. Did she know? Could she see the truth I hadn't spoken? That truth came spilling out one quiet Saturday night when I was 15. Daddy and Paul were at the movies, Rosie at a friend's, and Louise and I were alone, her crocheting, me reading Jane Eyre. She set her needles down, her voice soft but direct. "Eleanor, what really happened with your grandfather?" The question hit like a stone through glass. I froze, the book slipping in my hands. "He fell, hit his head," I said. The old lie automatic. She shook her head. I'm asking because I saw it in you, the fear. The way you shrank when he was near. I know that look. Eleanor. I lived it when I was young. Her confession broke me open. Tears came, silent at first, then a flood. No one would believe me, I whispered. He said it'd hurt Daddy. Louise moved to the couch, pulling me into her arms. I'd have believed you, she said, her voice fierce. I saw the signs, but I needed proof. Your father told me, after you moved here, he had to tell someone. I pulled back, stunned. Daddy had spoken. He protected you, she said. And you protected him by staying quiet. But that weight's too heavy for you alone. I told her everything, the shed, the nights, the shame that choked me. She listened, never flinching, her hand steady on mine. It wasn't your fault, she said when I finished. The only one to blame is gone. Now you need to live, Eleanor, not just survive. Those words were a lifeline, pulling me from the dark. For the first time, I wasn't alone with my secret. Someone knew, understood, and didn't judge me. The shame didn't vanish, but it felt lighter, shared. That conversation was a hinge, swinging my life toward healing. I wrote more, pouring my pain into stories, letting it transform into something I could control. School felt less like a battle. I joined Clara's study group, laughed easier. Louise's belief, Daddy's quiet pride, and Sister Cecilia's encouragement were building a new Ellie, one who could dream, who might one day teach, who was learning to forgive herself. At 15. Standing on the cusp of young womanhood. In Fairview, I was piecing myself together, but the scars of my past made trusting others, especially men, a battle. Aunt Louise's house was a safe harbor, and my writing gave me a voice. Yet I shied away from closeness, fearing it might awaken old ghosts. Then came Anthony, a young doctor whose gentle persistence cracked my defenses, leading me to a love I hadn't believed possible. Sharing my truth with him was the hardest step I'd ever taken, but it was also the one that set me free to imagine a future beyond survival. Anthony arrived in Fairview in 1966, fresh from medical school in Atlanta, with a boyish grin and a mission to improve rural health care. I met him at Our Lady of Grace, where he came to vaccinate students against polio. I was 16, helping Sister Cecilia organize the line of chattering kids. When he teased, "Does the teacher need a shot, too?" I blushed, muttering I was fine, but his easy warmth lingered. He kept finding reasons to visit exams, hygiene talks, always lingering to chat with me about books or the weather. His hazel eyes sought mine, kind but curious, and I felt seen in a way that both thrilled and terrified me. I kept him at arm's length. The other teachers giggled, calling him a catch, but I couldn't shake the fear that letting someone close would unravel me. My past had taught me men could hide monsters, and though Anthony seemed different, patient, respectful, my heart wasn't ready. I'd make excuses when he asked me to a church picnic or a soda at the diner, saying I had to study or help Louise. He'd nod, undeterred, and try again a week later. "You're tougher than my old anatomy professor," he'd joke, and I'd smile despite myself. Louise saw through my walls. One evening, as we snapped beans in her kitchen, she said, "Eleanor, not every man's like your grandfather. Your father's proof, and Anthony seems cut from good cloth. Don't let fear steal your chance at happiness." Her words stung, echoing the truth I'd buried. By shutting out love, I was letting my past win. I lay awake that night, Mama's scarf under my cheek, wrestling with the idea of risking my heart. Could I trust Anthony? Could I trust myself? By summer 1967, I was 17, and Anthony's persistence wore me down. I agreed to dinner in Marietta, a bigger town nearby. My stomach knotted with nerves. In a simple blue dress Louis let me. I felt like a stranger, but his easy chatter about his childhood dog and botched med school experiments eased me. "I'm not proposing, Eleanor," he said, catching my fidgeting. "Just dinner." I laughed, surprising myself, and felt a spark of possibility. Our courtship was slow, deliberate. He never pushed, sensing my hesitations, and his respect built a bridge over my fears. We'd walk by Fairview's pond, talking about dreams, his to open a clinic, mine to teach. He'd bring me wildflowers, never expecting more than a smile. But my past loomed, a shadow I couldn't ignore. If I loved him, he deserved the truth. But what if it drove him away? One starry night, sitting by the pond, I decided to risk it. My voice shook as I told him everything: Mama's death, grandfather's abuse, Daddy's desperate act to protect me. I stared at the water, afraid to meet his eyes, words spilling like a dam breaking. When I finished, silence stretched, and I braced for rejection. Then I felt his hand, gentle, on mine. I looked up to see tears in his eyes. "Eleanor," he said, voice thick, "thank you for trusting me. What you survived, it's unimaginable, and you're extraordinary for it. Nothing you said changes how I feel. I'm just more in awe of you." His words were a balm, soothing wounds I thought would never heal. He didn't pity me. He saw my strength, and that shifted something deep inside. For the first time, I believed I could be loved, not despite my past, but with it. After that, our bond deepened. Anthony became my safe place, his laughter chasing away nightmares. I still had moments of panic, flinching at a sudden touch, waking from dreams of the shed, but he was patient, letting me set the pace. Louise beamed, saying, "You're blooming, Eleanor." Daddy, too, warmed to him, clapping Anthony's shoulder after Sunday dinners. I was learning to trust, to let love fill the spaces fear had carved. The girl who'd locked her heart was opening, ready to build a life I'd once thought impossible. Marrying Anthony in 1968 was like stepping into a new world, one where love could coexist with my scars. At 21, I stood in Fairview's small church, wearing a simple ivory dress Louise had sewn, my hands trembling as I vowed to build a life with the man who'd seen my darkest truths and stayed. Our early years were a dance of joy and adjustment, as I learned to trust intimacy and embrace motherhood. My children, Charles and Mary, became my anchors, teaching me that healing wasn't just surviving, it was creating something beautiful. From the ashes of my past, our wedding was a quiet affair, with wildflowers on the tables and neighbors bringing cornbread and fried chicken. Daddy walked me down the aisle, his eyes misty, whispering, "Your mama's proud, Ellie." Louise, now married to Daddy, beamed from the front pew, while Paul and Rosie, grown but still my shadows, grinned. Anthony's vows were steady, promising to stand by me through every storm. I faltered on mine, the weight of the moment catching my throat, but his smile steadied me. That night, dancing to a local band in the parish hall, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I was finally Ellie, not just the girl who endured. We settled in a small house in Fairview, its porch overlooking a garden I filled with geraniums. A nod to Mama, Anthony opened a clinic, working long hours but always coming home with stories to make me laugh. Intimacy was hard at first. My body remembered what my mind tried to forget. Sudden touches could send me back to the shed, heart racing, and I'd freeze, ashamed. Anthony was patient, holding me through panic, saying, "We've got time, Eleanor." His gentleness rebuilt my trust, and slowly, I learned to lean into his touch, to find safety in his arms. In 1970, Charles was born, a blue-eyed boy whose tiny grip on my finger broke something open in me. Labor was grueling, haunted by memories of violation, but holding him, I whispered, "I'll keep you safe," a vow that echoed Daddy's to me. 2 years later came Mary, with dark curls and a fierce spirit. Motherhood was my redemption. Every lullaby, every scraped knee I kissed, was a reclaiming of the love stolen from me. I'd watch them sleep, Charles clutching a stuffed bear, Mary's thumb in her mouth, and feel a fierce protectiveness. No one would hurt them, not while I breathed. I kept teaching, moving to a local elementary school, where I found purpose shaping young minds. My students' wide eyes and eager questions reminded me of Paul and Rosie, and I poured myself into them, writing stories for class, encouraging their dreams. At home, I balanced diapers and lesson plans, Anthony pitching in with dishes or bedtime. We weren't perfect, money was tight, and my nightmares lingered, but we were a team, building a life rooted in love. The scars showed up in small ways. I'd hover over Charles and Mary, checking windows at night, startling at loud noises. Anthony noticed, gently suggesting I talk to someone, but I wasn't ready. Instead, I wrote journals, poems, stories, pouring my pain onto pages I kept. hidden. Louise, ever my confidant, read some, saying, "These are your strength, Eleanor. Don't stop." Her faith in me, like Anthony's, kept me grounded. By the mid-1970s, our life was full. Charles, at 5, was curious, always asking, why? Mary, 3, was fearless, climbing trees and bossing her brother. We'd take them to the Fairview Creek, skipping stones like I had as a child, Anthony's laughter mingling with theirs. Daddy and Louise visited often, their marriage a quiet partnership that warmed us all. Paul, now working in Atlanta, and Rosie, studying nursing, were building their own lives. But we stayed close, tied by shared history. Teaching gave me a voice beyond the classroom. I started a writing club, helping kids find their stories, and earned a promotion to principal by 1980. The role felt daunting, but Anthony's pride, "You're changing lives, Eleanor," pushed me forward. I was learning that my past didn't define me. It shaped my strength, my empathy, my drive to protect others. Yet I knew healing wasn't linear. Some nights, I'd wake from dreams of grandfather's voice, Anthony's arms pulling me back to safety. Each time, I'd rise, kiss my children's foreheads, and keep going. Charles and Mary were my proof that love could triumph. Watching them grow, Charles's shy smile, Mary's bold laugh, I saw the future I'd fought for. They didn't know my story, and maybe they never would, but they carried its legacy. A mother who'd survived, who'd chosen to build rather than break. With Anthony by my side, I was whole, not perfect, but ready for whatever storms lay ahead. The 1980s brought new storms, testing the resilience I'd built through love and motherhood. At 33, I was principal of Fairview's elementary school, a role that anchored me. While Anthony's clinic thrived, and our children, Charles and Mary, filled our home with light. But life, as I'd learned, never spares its trials. The sudden loss of Daddy, followed years later by Anthony's battle with cancer, shook me to my core. Through it all, my faith, quiet, hard-won, and rooted in survival, carried me, teaching me that even in grief, there's a path to peace. In 1980, Daddy died of a heart attack at 60, found among the orange trees he tended in Louise's backyard. The call came at dawn, Louise's voice trembling. "Eleanor, come quick." I drove to Fairview, heart pounding, but he was gone before I arrived. At his funeral, rain poured as his coffin was lowered into the same cemetery that held Mama and grandfather, men bound by blood but divided by heart. Paul, Rosie, Louise, Anthony, and I stood soaked, letting the water mix with our tears. Even the skies sang goodbye, Paul said, his voice thick. I nodded, feeling Daddy's quiet strength linger in me. He'd protected me, rebuilt us, and now I had to carry on his legacy. Louise leaned on us, her grief binding us closer. She moved in for a time, her practical wisdom a comfort as we navigated the void. "He loved you fiercely," she told me one night, her eyes on Daddy's old Bible. I nodded, clutching Mama's scarf, knowing he'd carried the weight of that night in 58 silently, just as I had. His death reopened old wounds, stirring nightmares, but I leaned into my family. Anthony's steady embrace, Charles's quiet hugs, Mary's chatter, finding strength to keep going. Life moved forward. Charles, at 10, was thoughtful, excelling in science, while Mary, 8, was bold, leading her friends in backyard adventures. I poured myself into school, advocating for kids from hard homes, seeing my younger self in their eyes. Anthony supported me, his clinic a haven for Fairview's poor. We'd steal evenings on our porch, geraniums blooming, talking about dreams, maybe a trip to the coast, maybe a third child. But in 1994, those dreams shattered when Anthony, at 54, found a lump. The diagnosis was swift: pancreatic cancer, aggressive, with months left. The news hit like Mama's death, sudden and cruel. Anthony faced it with his usual calm, joking with the kids to ease their fear. But I saw the strain in his eyes. I took leave from school, caring for him at home as he weakened. Chemo stole his strength, his hair, but not his spirit. He'd hold my hand, saying, "You're my rock, Eleanor." I'd smile, hiding my terror, but at night, I'd sob into Mama's scarf, questioning why God would take him after all we'd endured. Charles, at 24, came home from medical school, his father's courage inspiring his own path. Mary, 22, pregnant and alone after her boyfriend left, leaned on me, her strength mirroring mine. Anthony's final months were a blur of hospice visits, whispered prayers, and moments of grace. We'd read to him Dickens, the Bible, his favorite stories filling the quiet. One night, alone with him, I held his frail hand as he struggled to breathe. "Don't be afraid," I whispered, echoing his words from my nightmares. "I'm here." His eyes, cloudy but clear, met mine. "You're the strongest person I know," he said, his last words before slipping away in 1995. I sat with him, tears falling, feeling both broken and whole. His love had healed me, and I knew it wouldn't end with death. Grief was familiar, but this was different. Anthony was my partner, my safe place. Charles and Mary rallied, their presence a lifeline. Louise, now frail, moved back with us, her stories of daddy keeping us grounded. I returned to teaching, finding solace in routine, but retirement loomed. In 1996, I stepped down, focusing on advocacy for abused children, channeling my pain into purpose. Mary's daughter, Sophia, born during Anthony's illness, was a spark of joy, her laughter a reminder of life's persistence. Charles followed Anthony into medicine, his quiet determination a tribute to his father. Faith held me through it all, not the loud, preached kind, but a deep trust forged in darkness. I'd pray by the creek, Mama's scarf in hand, feeling God's presence in the stars, the wind. "My children's love. You write straight with crooked lines," Louise would say, and I understood now. My pain had shaped my strength, my losses, my gratitude. I wasn't spared suffering, but I was given the grace to endure, to find meaning in it. As I faced the years ahead, I knew I'd carry Anthony and Daddy with me, their love a light no storm could dim. At 78, sitting on the porch of my small Fairview home, I look back on a life woven with pain and redemption, a tapestry of storms and sunlight. The Georgia air is warm tonight, heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine, and the stars above remind me of the nights I whispered to Mama, seeking strength. My journey from a terrified girl in a blue house to a woman who found her voice has been long, but it's taught me that scars can become stories of survival. As I share this, I hope it reaches someone lost in their own darkness, offering a spark to guide them toward light. My life after Anthony's death in 1995 was a quiet rebuilding. I retired from teaching but stayed active, volunteering at a shelter for women and children escaping abuse. Their eyes wary, like mine once were, drove me to listen, to advocate, to show them they weren't alone. I'd tell stories of resilience, never my own, but theirs, helping them find their strength. Charles, now a pediatrician, married and fathered 3 children, his gentle care echoing Anthony's. Mary, a lawyer defending victims of violence, raised Sophia into a fierce young woman, her compassion a mirror of our family's heart. My 5 grandchildren know me as Grandma Ellie, the pie maker, the storyteller, unaware of the battles I fought to become her. Writing remained my refuge. I published a small book of poems in 2000, under a pseudonym, pouring my healing into verses about creeks, stars, and unbroken spirits. Readers sent letters, sharing their own wounds, and I realized my story, even veiled, could heal others. Louise, who lived until 2005, read it, her eyes proud. "You found your voice, Eleanor," she said, and I nodded, grateful for her role in freeing it. Paul and Rosie, now grandparents themselves, visit often, our bond unbreakable despite the years. We don't speak of grandfather, but our shared silences hold understanding. Faith has been my anchor, not a loud hallelujah but a quiet trust in a God who sees. It grew in the shed's darkness, in Anthony's love, in my children's laughter. I pray daily, not for answers but for grace to carry what comes. The creek in Fairview, where I still walk, is my chapel, its ripples whispering Mama's courage, Daddy's sacrifice, Anthony's devotion. My geraniums bloom on the porch, a tribute to Mama, and I tend them with hands that once trembled but now hold steady. Looking back, I see a girl who lost everything. Mama, innocence, trust, but found more than she dreamed. Love, family, purpose. They rose from ashes because I chose to keep going. If I could speak to 10-year-old Ellie, I'd say, "You're stronger than you know." The The pain won't define you. It'll shape your fire. You're not alone. That's my message to anyone listening now. Your wounds don't end you. They can forge you into someone who lights the way for others. I've lived fully, not perfectly. Nightmares faded, but scars remain, etched in my caution, my fierce love for my family. Yet they're marks of victory, proof I survived. My grandchildren's laughter, my garden's blooms, the letters from readers, they're my legacy, built from a life I reclaimed. As I close this story, I ask you to share it if it moved you. Like this video, subscribe, tell someone who needs hope. Your voice can break silence, too. The stars are bright tonight, and I feel Mama, Daddy, Anthony near, their love a soft glow. I'm at peace, not because the storms stopped, but because I learned to dance in them. If you're in your own valley, know this. The light is waiting, and you're stronger than the dark. Keep walking, keep fighting, keep believing. You'll find your way. Asterisk as the jasmine scent fades and the stars grow faint. I sit on my Fairview porch, 78 years old, my heart full of a life reclaimed. From the blue house where I lost Mama and my innocence at 10, to the woman who built a family with Anthony, raised Charles and Mary, and found purpose in teaching. My journey has been a testament to resilience. The abuse I endured, the silence I kept, could have broken me, but love, Daddy's protection, Louisa's understanding, Anthony's devotion stitched me whole. Faith, quiet and steady, guided me through Daddy's death, Anthony's cancer, and the everyday trials of motherhood and loss. Writing became my voice, advocacy my purpose, helping others find their light as I did mine. My grandchildren's laughter, my geranium's blooms, are proof that beauty can rise from pain. To anyone in darkness, I whisper, you are not alone. Your scars are battle marks, your story unfinished. Share this tale if it touched you. Let it spark hope in another. The stars above hold no judgment, only light, and they shine for you, too, promising a dawn worth fighting for. I close my eyes, feeling Mama's warmth, Anthony's hand in mine, and smile, at peace with a life fully lived, ready for whatever lies beyond.